It begins, as the most enduring mysteries often do, not with a scream, but with a quiet stillness. The date is December 1st, 1948. The place, Somerton Park Beach in Adelaide, Australia, a peaceful stretch of sand just as the sun begins to warm the shore. A local jeweler named John Lyons is out for a morning walk with his wife when he spots something near the crippled children's home. It's a man. He's propped against the stone seawall, legs extended, feet crossed. He's dressed impeccably in a brown, double-breasted suit, a crisp white shirt, and a tie. He looks, to all the world, like a man simply resting, perhaps sleeping off a long night. There's even a half-smoked cigarette resting on the collar of his coat, untouched, as if it had fallen from his lips the moment he drifted off. But as John Lyons gets closer, the stillness becomes unsettling. The man is too still. His skin has a cold, waxy pallor against the morning light. There is no rise and fall of his chest. He has no wallet, no identification, no money. The labels from every single piece of his clothing have been meticulously, deliberately cut away. There are no signs of a struggle, no marks of violence. He is a ghost, a perfectly dressed phantom who appeared on the beach from nowhere. But the police, in their search for answers, would eventually find one. A clue so small it was almost missed. A tiny piece of paper, tightly rolled and sewn into a secret, hidden pocket of the man's trousers. On it, two strange words were printed, a message from a dead language that would launch a global investigation spanning more than 70 years. A mystery that would draw in spies, secret lovers, and codebreakers. A mystery that, even today, only gets deeper the closer we get to the truth. In this investigation, we will reconstruct the timeline of this impossible case. We will examine every bizarre clue, from that secret code to a mysterious nurse whose name would haunt the investigation for decades. We will explore the years of failed theories and reveal the cutting-edge DNA science that, just recently, finally gave the Somerton Man a name, only to create an even more profound puzzle. This is the story of how finding a man's identity made him more mysterious than ever before. Our story begins in a post-war world, a time of cautious optimism shadowed by the dawn of a new, colder kind of conflict. The year is 1948. While the world celebrated the end of global bloodshed, new battle lines were being drawn in secret. The Iron Curtain was descending across Europe, and the first tremors of the Cold War were being felt across the globe. It was an age of spies and atomic secrets, a time when a person could vanish without a trace. And in Adelaide, a quiet, conservative city on the southern coast of Australia, the modern world's anxieties were about to wash ashore in the most enigmatic way imaginable. Adelaide was known then as the City of Churches, a peaceful, sun-drenched place where life moved at a slower pace, a city where major crime was a rarity, and a mystery like this was utterly alien. This peaceful isolation, however, was deceptive. Just north of the city, the foundations were being laid for the Woomera Prohibited Area, a top-secret rocket range that would soon make this quiet corner of Australia a place of intense interest for foreign powers. It was against this backdrop of simmering, hidden tension that our story begins. On the night of November 30th, under a warm, still sky, the pieces of that mystery began to fall into place. Several witnesses would later come forward, their memories forming a fragmented, ghostly image of the man's final hours. Around 7 p.m., a local couple strolling along the esplanade at Somerton Park recalled seeing a well-dressed man in a suit, standing under a street lamp, gazing out at the dark expanse of the sea. Half an hour later, another couple, sitting on a bench near the crippled children's home, a local landmark, saw a man of a similar description reclining in the exact spot against the seawall where the body would later be found. They watched him for nearly half an hour, a lone figure in the fading light. At one point, he slowly raised his right arm, held it aloft for a moment, then let it drop limply to his side. They would later describe the movement as strange, almost convulsive, but in the moment, it was easily dismissed. A fleeting oddity in an otherwise unremarkable evening. They assumed he was drunk, perhaps trying and failing to light a cigarette. It was a simple, fateful assumption. They had no way of knowing they were the last people to see the Somerton Man alive. Unconcerned, the couple left him there, a solitary silhouette against the darkening sky, seemingly at peace with the world. He would not be disturbed again until morning. When Police Constable John Moss arrived at the scene the next morning, the first thing he noted was the profound absence of anything obviously wrong. This wasn't a typical crime scene. There was no disarray, no sign of a struggle. The man's double-breasted suit was neat, perfectly pressed. His shoes, polished to a shine, bore no scuffs, no traces of sand, which was deeply odd for a man who had supposedly spent the night on a sandy beach. In his pockets, they found a small collection of mundane items, an unused train ticket from Adelaide to the nearby suburb of Henley Beach, a journey of only a few minutes he never took. A city bus ticket, its purpose unknown. An American-made metal comb. A half-empty packet of juicy fruit gum. A box of Bryant and May matches. And then, a micro-mystery within the larger puzzle. A pack of Army Club cigarettes, a common brand. But inside the pack were 7 cigarettes of another, more expensive brand called Kensitas. Why the switch? In a world of subtle signals, was this a form of identification? Was he hiding his preference for a more luxurious smoke? Or was it just a meaningless quirk, the kind of detail that sends investigators down a rabbit hole to nowhere? It was a tiny, dissonant detail. A potential clue. But a clue to what? The body was taken to the Royal Adelaide Hospital, where it fell under the examination of one of Australia's most respected pathologists, Sir John Burton Cleland. If anyone could unravel this puzzle, it was him. But the autopsy only deepened the mystery. The man was estimated to be in his early 40s, stood 5 feet 11 inches tall, and was, in Cleland's own words, in peak physical condition. His hands were soft and unmarked, showing no signs of manual labor. He was not a working man. But it was his legs that were most peculiar. His calf muscles were high and pronounced, firm and athletic, like those of a ballet dancer or perhaps a long-distance runner. His toes were oddly wedge-shaped, as if he frequently wore pointed boots. A body that was a perfect specimen on the outside, yet a complete medical contradiction on the inside. Cleland's internal findings were baffling. His pupils were unusually small. His spleen was engorged to nearly 3 times its normal size. His liver was congested with blood. His stomach contained the bloody remnants of his last meal. These were all classic signs of poisoning. But when samples were sent for forensic testing, no trace of any known poison could be found. Cleland was stumped. The technology of the 1940s had its limits. He could only speculate that the man had been administered a fast-acting, powerful barbiturate or a plant-based poison like digitalis. Digitalis, derived from the foxglove plant, is a cardiac glycoside. In controlled doses, it's a heart medicine. In uncontrolled doses, it causes the heart to seize in a way that perfectly mimics a natural heart attack, and it metabolizes quickly, leaving almost no trace. It was the perfect murder weapon for an intelligent, meticulous killer. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, likely due to poisoning. But the coroner, Thomas Cleland, couldn't be sure. He left the man's file open, a question mark in the official record. The last meal was a simple one, a meat pasty, eaten 3 to 4 hours before his death. A final, humanizing detail in an increasingly inhuman puzzle. With no identification, the police were left with only the man's face. A plaster cast was made of his head and shoulders, a hauntingly detailed bust that was circulated in public appeals across the country. It was a face that thousands would see, but no one would claim. His fingerprints were sent across the globe, to the FBI in the United States, to Scotland Yard in London. It was one of the most extensive fingerprint searches ever conducted by Australian police. Every search came back with the same result, no match. This man, it seemed, had no official existence anywhere in the English-speaking world. Then, on January 14, 1949, 6 weeks after the body was found, a breakthrough. The staff at the Adelaide railway station's cloakroom discovered a brown suitcase that had been checked in on November 30th, the day before the man died. The tag had been removed. When police opened it, they felt a surge of hope. Inside was a collection of clothing, a dressing gown, slippers, trousers, an undershirt. There was also a stenciling kit, the kind used for marking cargo on merchant ships. A table knife that had been crudely sharpened down into a point, like a makeshift weapon. And most curiously, a spool of orange, waxed barber brand thread. This thread was not commercially available in Australia at the time. It was an import from the United States. It was another foreign object, another piece that didn't fit. A detail that seemed insignificant at the time, but as we'll see, this thread would become a critical piece of the puzzle much later on. But as police examined each item of clothing, that initial hope turned to a cold, familiar dread. Every single name tag had been carefully, precisely, cut away. All except 3. On a tie, a laundry bag, and a singlet, the name T. Keane was written. For a moment, they had him. But the hope was quickly dashed. Police launched a massive search, checking military records, electoral rolls, and shipping manifests across Australia. They found no missing person named T. Keane. They concluded it was a red herring. This wasn't just carelessness, it was a systematic erasure. The work of a man determined to become a ghost. Who was this man? A man in perfect physical shape, who died of a poison that left no trace. A man who traveled with a suitcase full of strange tools, only to meticulously erase his own identity from it. A man who wanted, more than anything, to be a ghost. The police had reached a dead end. But they had missed something. Back at the morgue, in the man's trousers, a tiny, hidden pocket held the key. A secret that would blow the case wide open. For months, the investigation had stalled. The man in the morgue remained a nameless phantom, his story a blank page. The public appeals had grown cold, and the trail of clues had evaporated. The case was on the verge of being relegated to the archives, another unsolved death in a sea of forgotten files. But the pathologist, Sir John Burton Cleland, was a man of meticulous detail, haunted by the contradictions of the case. He insisted on a second, more thorough examination of the man's clothing before the body was finally prepared for burial. And it was during this final check, in April of 1949, that a police detective felt something. A small, hard lump, deep inside the waistband of the trousers. It wasn't a standard pocket. It was a tiny, hidden fob pocket, the kind commonly used for a pocket watch, but this one had been secretly, and rather crudely, sewn into the larger pocket. And the thread used to stitch it was a familiar color. It was the same uncommon, orange waxed thread from the spool found inside the man's suitcase. This was no tailor's work. This was a custom modification. A secret compartment. It had been missed completely in the initial search. Inside this secret compartment was a tiny, tightly rolled scrap of paper, no bigger than a thumbnail. When the detectives carefully unfurled it, they found just 2 words, printed in an elegant, distinctive typeface. The words were, Tamám Shud. It was not English. It was a phrase that sent investigators scrambling for answers, a linguistic key to an unknown door. A librarian at the local public library quickly identified it. It was Persian. The final 2 words from a famous 12th century book of poetry, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of quatrains, or 4-line poems, meditating on life, death, fate, and the fleeting nature of existence. The meaning of the phrase was as poetic as it was chilling. Tamám Shud. It translates to, it is ended, or it is finished. This was a seismic shift in the case. This was no random death, no simple accident. The scrap of paper felt like a message, a final, deliberate statement. But what was it saying? Was this a suicide note, a philosophical acceptance of his own end, a man quoting poetry as he faced oblivion? Or was it a message from a killer, a declaration that their work was done, a final, taunting signature left on their victim? The man had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase his identity from the world, yet he had carried this single, profound message, hidden on his person. It was a clue that pointed not to who he was, but to the state of his soul at the moment of his death. The police now had a new mission, their most promising lead yet: find the exact book from which this final page had been torn. They believed that if they found the book, they would find the answers. They had no idea that the book would only lead them deeper into the labyrinth. The discovery of the Tamám Shud scrap launched a nationwide search. Police appealed to the public, asking anyone who might have a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam to check if the final page was missing. The appeal was a long shot. The book, while not common, was not exceptionally rare either. The specific edition with that distinctive typeface was an English translation by Edward Fitzgerald, published in New Zealand by Whitcomb and Toombs. 4 months, the trail went cold once again. Hope began to fade. Then, in late July, a man walked into the Adelaide police station. He gave his name to the authorities but asked to remain anonymous to the public, a request the police granted, referring to him in their files only as Ronald Francis. He told them a strange story. Around the time the Somerton Man died, he had parked his unlocked car near Somerton Beach. When he returned, he and his brother-in-law found a copy of the Rubaiyat tossed into the back footwell. He thought nothing of it at the time, assuming a stranger had simply discarded it. It wasn't until he saw the police appeal in the newspaper months later that he checked the book. The final page, the page containing the words Tamám Shud, had been torn out. This was the book. The police examined it with forensic precision. And in the back, they found what they were looking for. Faint indentations, written in pencil. At first glance, it was a jumble of letters. At second glance, it was a code. 5 lines of capital letters, with the second line inexplicably struck through. It was a cryptographer's nightmare. Below the code was something more tangible, an unlisted telephone number. The police now had 2 explosive new leads. The code was immediately sent to Australia's Department of Defence, where top naval intelligence and military codebreakers went to work. They were confident they could solve it. They failed. Utterly. They analyzed letter frequency, searched for patterns, and tried every decryption technique they knew, from simple substitution ciphers to complex wartime codes. The message was too short to establish a clear pattern, and it didn't match any known cipher system. Some experts speculated it might be the first letters of words from a poem or another book. Others thought it was meaningless gibberish. To this day, the code remains unbroken. It is a silent, 5-line testament to the secrets the Somerton Man carried. But the phone number was a different story. That lead was very real. And it would take them to the door of a woman who would become the dark heart of this entire mystery. The unlisted phone number belonged to a young woman who lived on Mosley Street in the suburb of Glenelg, just a few minutes' walk from where the body was found. Her name was Jessica Thompson, though she went by Jo, and often used the nickname Jeston. She was a former nurse, living a quiet life with her young son. When Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean arrived at her door on July 26, 1949, he expected a routine interview, a simple step in eliminating a lead. He had no idea he was about to have one of the most bizarre and frustrating conversations of his career. Lean showed Jeston the plaster cast of the dead man's face. The reaction was immediate and visceral. According to his official report, Jeston was completely taken aback, to the point of giving the appearance she was about to faint. She stared at the bust, her eyes wide with what looked like a horrified recognition. Lean would later state that she seemed to recoil, her hand coming to her mouth. He pressed her. Did she know this man? Her answer was evasive. She denied everything. She claimed she had no idea who he was or why he would have her phone number. Throughout the interview she appeared, in Lean's words, very guarded, deflecting every question about a possible connection with what he felt was practiced ease. She told the detective that she was currently being troubled by an unwanted suitor, and perhaps he was the one trying to contact her. But it was a weak explanation, and her physical reaction to the bust told a different story. But she did offer one piece of information. She admitted that years earlier, in 1945, she had owned a copy of the Rubaiyat. She claimed she had given it as a gift to an army lieutenant named Alfred Boxall while she was working as a nurse at the Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney. This was it. A breakthrough, but a strange one. Detective Lean left the interview wrestling with two conflicting convictions. The first was his gut certainty that Jessica Thompson was lying about not knowing the man on the beach. Her reaction had been too visceral, her denials too practiced. But his second conviction was that her lead, the name Alfred Boxall, was the only concrete thing they had. For the investigation team, this one tangible clue was enough. A powerful and logical theory quickly formed. The dead man had to be Alfred Boxall. They theorized that he had received the book from Jeston, a woman he knew, and for some hidden reason, returned to Adelaide years later, only to die near her home with her phone number as his only connection. The story, for the first time, seemed to fit. The Sydney police were contacted and immediately launched a search for Alfred Boxall. The entire investigation hinged on this one man. And in a matter of days, they found him. Alfred Boxall was alive and well, working a regular job in the maintenance section of a bus depot in Sydney. When the detectives interviewed him, they asked him about the book. Boxall thought for a moment, then went to his library and produced the copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam that Jeston had given him all those years ago. It was a cherished memento. Inside, she had written a verse from the book. He opened it to the back for the detectives. The final page, with the words, Tamám Shud, was still there. It had never been torn out. It was a stunning, almost unbelievable dead end. Alfred Boxall was a complete red herring. The investigation had been sent on a wild goose chase, and it led right back to square one, with one haunting, unanswered question hanging in the air. If the dead man wasn't Alfred Boxall, then who was the man on the beach that Jessica Jeston Thompson seemed so terrified to identify? What secret was she protecting? A secret she would take with her to the grave. The labyrinth now had a gatekeeper. And she wasn't talking. With the investigation officially stalled, the Somerton Man case drifted from the pages of police files into the realm of legend. 4 decades, without a name, all investigators and researchers could do was theorize, attempting to build a story from the bizarre collection of clues left behind. And from that collection, 2 powerful narratives emerged, each painting a vastly different picture of the man on the beach. The first, and most enduring, is that the Somerton Man was a spy. This was not pure fantasy, but a theory grounded in the geopolitical realities of the time. In the late 1940s, the Cold War was escalating, and Australia was not as isolated as it seemed. Just a few hundred kilometers north of Adelaide was the Woomera Prohibited Area, a top-secret Anglo-Australian military installation. It was the heart of the British atomic program and a site for testing long-range guided missiles. Woomera was, without question, a prime target for Soviet intelligence. In this theory, the Somerton Man was an agent, either Allied or Soviet, who had been compromised. His death by a rare, untraceable poison is a hallmark of intelligence agency assassinations, a clean and deniable way to eliminate a threat. His meticulous removal of all identification was standard espionage tradecraft, an attempt to protect his network even in death. And the unbreakable code? A one-time pad cipher, the only truly unbreakable form of encryption, a message meant for a contact he never met, or perhaps the key to a dead-drop location. In this version of the story, Jessica Jeston Thompson was either his handler, a fellow agent he was meant to meet, or a civilian asset he was involved with who was too terrified of the deadly consequences to identify him to the police. The man on the beach was not a victim of random circumstance. He was a casualty of the silent, global war being fought in the shadows. But there is another, more intimate theory. One that pulls the case from the world of international espionage into the dark corners of a human heart. This is the theory of the jilted lover. In this narrative, the Somerton Man and Jessica Thompson were in a secret, illicit affair. He travels to Adelaide to see her, perhaps to rekindle a dying flame or to confront her over a betrayal. But the relationship ends tragically. The Tamám Shud paper, meaning "it is finished," is his final poetic suicide note, a declaration of his heartbreak. The code in the book, in this version, is not a state secret, but a secret language between lovers, perhaps an acrostic poem, a list of their memories, a secret only the two of them could ever understand. His death, by a poison he administered himself, was an act of despair. And Justin's terrified reaction upon seeing the plaster cast wasn't fear of spies, but the sudden gut-wrenching shock and guilt of seeing the man whose heart she had broken, now dead, almost on her doorstep. Her refusal to identify him was an act of desperate self-preservation, an attempt to keep her quiet suburban life from being shattered by a public scandal. This theory painted a picture not of a spy, but of a man destroyed by love. For 74 years, these two stories, the spy or the lover, were all we had. A binary choice between two compelling fictions, with a nameless man at its center. Until everything changed. For over 70 years, these theories were all we had. His name was a ghost. His secrets were buried with him under a simple headstone that read, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." The plaster cast of his face, locked away in a police archive, was the only tangible link to his existence. But trapped within that plaster, unseen for decades, was the one thing that could finally break the silence. A few strands of human hair. Enter Professor Derek Abbott of the University of Adelaide. A man who became captivated, then obsessed, with the Somerton Man mystery. His fascination was so profound that it led him on a multi-decade quest for answers. He and his American colleague, Colleen Fitzpatrick, a renowned forensic genealogist who pioneered the use of genetic genealogy to solve cold cases, embarked on a near-impossible task. In 2011, after years of petitioning, Professor Abbott was granted access to the death mask. He and his team managed to find several hairs trapped in the plaster. For years, the DNA was too degraded to be of any use. But as technology advanced, what was once impossible became possible. They managed to extract a tiny, viable DNA sample from the root of one of the hairs. Using cutting-edge DNA sequencing, they began the painstaking process of genealogical analysis. They uploaded the man's genetic profile to large databases like Ancestry.com, searching not for him, but for distant relatives, third, fourth, or even fifth cousins who had submitted their own DNA. Over the years of work, they slowly, meticulously, built a massive family tree of over 4,000 people, searching for the one missing branch that would lead them back to the unknown man. In July of 2022, they found him. After 74 years, the ghost finally had a name. The Somerton Man was identified as Carl Charles Webb. So, who was Carl Charles Webb? He was not a spy from a foreign land. He was born on November 16, 1905, in Footscray, a suburb of Melbourne, Australia. He was the youngest of 6 siblings. He was an electrical engineer and an instrument maker, a man who worked with his hands and his mind. He was married to a woman named Dorothy Robertson, known as Doff. Finally, a biography. Finally, facts. But these facts did not solve the mystery. They acted as fuel on a fire, making the blaze of unanswered questions burn even hotter. Why was Carl Webb, an engineer from Melbourne, in Adelaide, hundreds of miles from his home? What instruments did he make? In a post-war world, a skilled instrument maker could be a valuable asset to any number of government or clandestine organizations. Does his profession, far from disproving the spy theory, actually support it? And perhaps the most baffling question of all, why did his wife, Dorothy, never report him missing? Records show he had left her sometime in 1947. Dorothy would later file for divorce in 1951, citing desertion, but there was no official search, no public cry for a husband who had vanished. It was as if he had simply walked out of his own life, and his family had allowed him to become a ghost. Was their separation amicable, or was there something darker at play? We started this journey with a nameless man on a beach, a ghost defined only by his secrets. Now, we have a name, Carl Webb, but the ghost remains. Knowing his name did not solve the puzzle, it simply gave the ghost a face. And it forced us to ask a far more difficult question. Not, who is this man? But, what could possibly make a man erase himself so completely from his own life, only to die alone on a cold, silent beach? We started this journey with a nameless man on a beach, a ghost defined only by his secrets. For more than 70 years, he was a story without a beginning. We followed a trail of clues that led us from a suit with no labels to a suitcase with no owner, from a scrap of ancient poetry to an unbreakable code, from a mysterious nurse with a haunted expression to a dead-end lead named Alfred Boxall. For decades, the world was left with a perfect, unsolvable puzzle, a testament to the fact that some secrets are meant to be kept forever. Then, science gave us what we thought was the final piece. A name. Carl Charles Webb. We expected an answer, a resolution, a final chapter to close the book. But the reality is, the DNA that gave us a name also took away our simple theories. The ghost now has a face, but his secrets remain his own. Knowing who he was only makes the why and the how of his end more profound, more baffling. We are left, not with a solution, but with a better, deeper mystery. And perhaps the true meaning of Tamám Shud wasn't that his life was finished, but that the simple part of the mystery, the part about a nameless man, was over, and the real, complex story of Carl Webb was just beginning. A story whose final pages may never be read. The official file on the Somerton Man may have a name attached to it, but the investigation continues here, in this community. Now that we know his name might be Carl Webb, does this change your theory? We want to hear from you. Does the identity of an electrical engineer and instrument maker, a man with technical skills, strengthen the Cold War spy theory for you? Or does the fact that his wife never reported him missing point to a more personal, tragic story of a man fleeing a life he could no longer bear? What do you make of the code? And who was the mysterious Justin really? The evidence is all on the table. We read every comment, so share your most detailed thoughts and theories below. Let's see if together we can shed some light on the shadows. This is the level of deep investigation we bring to every case. We believe that every story, no matter how cold or obscure, deserves to be told with respect, with clarity, and with a relentless curiosity for the truth. If you believe some mysteries deserve more than to be forgotten, then you have found your community here. Subscribe to Obscura True Crime and turn on notifications. A new case is uncovered every day.